Thank you.
Give them hell. This is Webster Tarpley. I'm here in Washington, D.C., or thereabouts, and I hope people some degree familiar with me. Let me just introduce myself briefly. Alex made me promise that I wouldn't try to flog my books too much, but I am the author of Obama, the Postmodern Coup, which is available at the InfoWars website. I'm also the author of Barack H. Obama, the Unauthorized Biography, which I think you can only get at Amazon.com. And let me just say, I'm very interested to look at the sales of my book in Germany. The German translation of Obama, the Postmodern Coup is now about the number 65 bestseller on Amazon of Germany, meaning that I'm in the top 60 or 70 books in Germany. So that's interesting that they're going to be at least warned to some degree about what's approaching them. We're obviously at a historical turning point, and it's unfortunate that it is the making of a world tragedy. We have taken the leap into the abyss, but there are still lots and lots of things that we need to do about this. And basically the clarion call that I would like to issue today is we need to mobilize politically. Political mobilization is what is needed. Not other forms of self-defense activity, which, survivalism or what have you. That will not do it. These, you can do in your spare time. But your principal concern ought to be how to mobilize politically, because what we need is something that will amount to a united front against fascism. In other words, a united front against those economic policies, institutional policies, and foreign policies, too, that can be identified as in the fascist tradition. And when I talk about fascism, let's use the Italian fascism of Mussolini as a good example of that. It's one that allows us to study the thing a little bit more dispassionately, maybe, than some of the other examples, as people can readily understand. I would urge people, in addition to reading my books, Obama, the Postmodern Coup, and Barack H. Obama, the Unauthorized Biography, just go to your public library and get any book about Mussolini, any book about fascism, about the history of Italy right after World War I, the history of the 1920s and 30s. There are also good books about fascism in general. The problem that people have today is that the understanding of fascism has been reduced to a very, very low level. People don't really understand that fascism is not a top-down dictatorship that becomes more and more oppressive. It is rather a mass movement coming up out of the streets. It's sort of what you've been seeing in these stadiums around the country for the Obama stadium appearances, what you saw there in Denver, what you saw there in Oregon or in Philadelphia. Last night we had a big crowd out there in Grant Park in Chicago, the oceanic crowd, the orator in the middle, the massy mass, preferably at night. All of these things are very, very disturbing, hearkening back to the political liturgy, the political symbolism of the 1920s and the 1930s. So here's what I suggest we do. In that hour and a half that I have with you today, I'd like to talk myself for about 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll go over to phone calls. I would suggest the following. First of all, there should be no honeymoon for the fascist corporate state. We don't need 100 days honeymoon. We don't need any honeymoon. There should be no illusions about this. People are caught up in the hysteria of Obama. Don't be. This is a very grim and very ominous situation we're now in. We've come out of it not with the worst of all possible outcomes, but with a bad one. We've got a one-party state. We've got the repo clique, the Reid, Pelosi, Obama clique, now taking over the U.S. government. Most of the really bad stuff under Bush, in terms of the wars at least, came under one-party Republican rule. That was bad. Now we're going to have one-party Democratic rule. I'm afraid that's going to be worse, if only because the world economic depression is going to make it worse. So no honeymoon, no 100 days. It's going to be a mockery to compare Obama's 100 days with Franklin D. Roosevelt's. This will be the 100 days in reverse. This will be payments to bankers, not emergency relief to people that are starving and hurting. So no honeymoon. Secondly, there must be no fascist censorship. We don't want anybody tampering with the First Amendment. It has served us very well. We are, after all, traditionalists. We have that saving touch of conservatism. We want the full freedom guaranteed in the First Amendment of the Constitution. We don't want to hear about fairness doctrines. We don't want government bureaucrats tampering with the media. We don't want Chuck Schumer with his bankrupt argument that pornography is regulated and therefore free speech on talk radio ought to be also. We don't need that. We need more media diversity, not less. The fairness doctrine is a way to muzzle and censor the mass media. So we don't want any part of it. We also don't want hate crime or hate speech legislation. We don't want politically correct speech codes being rammed down the throat of the American people. Watch for Pelosi and her totalitarian liberal cohorts to try to impose things of that nature. Another very important one, we don't want the institutionalization of governmental or paragovernmental fascist militias. We don't want a Homeland Security Corps of the type that Obama has talked about. We don't want a Green Corps. We don't want any of the 4 or 5 different kinds of quasi-fascist or fascistoid militias which Obama has proposed to create using public funding. ACORN is in some ways already a pilot project. It's a kind of a militia using government money, and you can see what they do, right? You don't have to expect them to come forward with black shirts or brown shirts, carrying billy clubs and dosing out castor oil to make their opponents sick to their stomach. It's going to be in a modern form, but we don't want any of these militias. Now, in terms of economic policy, there will be in the first 100 days the demand for more bailouts. We've had Jim Cramer, who speaks for the trading desk at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and J.P. Morgan Chase. Jim Cramer on CNBC has called for more bailouts, more money pumped into the edifice of $1 quadrillion of derivatives that Wall Street and their international allies have built up. We say no to bailouts, no more bailouts, and we don't want any part of the federal government to be cannibalized and looted in order to finance these bailouts. That includes, Kramer, the idea we don't want Social Security looted. We don't want Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid tampered with in order to pay the bills for George Soros, David Rockefeller, and the boys at Goldman Sachs who have put Barkey into office. There's also the question of fascist austerity. You've noticed that under the fascist regimes in Central Europe between the 2 world wars, one of the main tasks of the entire government was to drive down the standard of living, to massively transfer economic resources out of the hands of the common people and into the hands of bankrupt bankers. That is what Obama's proposing. I had to laugh when people talked about Obama as a socialist. Obama's not a socialist. This is social fascism. This is not about distributing wealth to poor people. This is about gouging everybody and giving Soros and David Rockefeller and Goldman Sachs the proceeds. It's very, very different. The chosen method for doing this, of course, requires left cover. We're now entering into a period of left cover government, which is different from what we've had under the right-wing reactionary period of Bush, Cheney, and the neocons. They're going to try to do this with a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade system, most likely a cap-and-trade system, which will, in effect, be a huge, unnecessary, totally ideological tax on all forms of production. This will drive down the standard of living in a dramatic way. So we say no to it. And we're going to be told, but that means you don't care about the polar bears. You don't care about the Arctic ice cap. The answer is simple, and I can give you this as a historian. I don't need climatologists. I don't need pseudoscientists or quackademics to come forward with their crazy global warming theory. We know that this is a matter of sunspot activity. We know that the medieval warm period corresponded to a high level of sunspot activity, the medieval maximum. We know that the Little Ice Age and the late 1500s and the beginning of the 1600s corresponded to minimums of solar and sunspot activity. So this is just crazy. This is pseudoscience. This is as bad as it gets in terms of junk science, pseudoscience, and the sort of thing, again, that we saw in Central Europe between the 2 world wars. Another no is no to free trade sellouts. We don't need any expansion of NAFTA. We don't want CAFTA. We don't want the authority of the international GATT, the World Trade Organization, and so forth. We don't need any more of that. And then, in the area of international politics, we can already see Obama has demanded the escalation of the war in Afghanistan. Obama was, of course, the biggest warmonger in the field, certainly the biggest warmonger in the Democratic field, and in many ways the biggest warmonger of them all, although McCain's foolish bluster sometimes obscured that fact. So it is a question of no to a confrontation with Russia, no confrontation with China, no attack on Sudan, no escalation of the Afghan war, no attack on Pakistan, because that is the secret of that one.